Okay, everyone, so I think we're just going to get started here. Hi, thanks for joining. I'm Annie Massa. I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's finance team, and I am so excited to host The Future of Finance, Leveraging Digital Transformation for Business Continuity today. So we're going to be examining today how the financial services industry is facing the challenges of COVID-19 using technology. And we want to hear from you, the leaders on the front lines of financial services, to discuss how you're prioritizing some of the changes brought about by this pandemic and how you're staying competitive during this challenging time. With so many businesses moved to 90% or more of their workforce at home, we want to see what the future looks like and where we go from here. So before we begin the program, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. We are new to virtual events too, so please bear with us if there are any technical issues. And if you're having trouble with audio or video quality, please just try refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, or if there's a crash and you get disconnected, try refreshing and logging back into the platform. If you see my video box blocking the slide behind me, you can just click on it and move it somewhere else on your screen so you're able to see. And we want to keep this discussion conversational. So if at any time you'd like to chime in on a topic, please use your body language to signal to me that you'd like to speak, or you could use our raise your hand feature at the top of the screen. There's a raised hand icon, and if you click on that button, I can see that you'd like to say something, and I'll do my best to call on you. Lastly, this is an interactive event, and we welcome you to network with your peers. There's a chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, and you can write to me or your peers in there. You can share information, so we encourage you to use that feature as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Diamond to say a few remarks. We'd like to thank IBM for making this possible and for sponsoring this today. Sarah is the Global Managing Director for Banking and Financial Markets at IBM. So Sarah, with that, you can take it away.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, thanks very much. Well, let me start off just by adding my thanks. I'm so glad everybody could join us for this roundtable discussion. And, I think given the challenges that we're all facing, it's more important than ever to find time to share ideas with our colleagues. And I might also point out with a great deal of pride that you're all IBM clients. And in fact, that we obviously believe bringing our clients together is an important role as your partner. So again, I'm especially pleased that you're able to make the time to do this. And I thought I'd just share just a very few quick comments on what we're seeing in terms of the impact of the pandemic on the financial services sector, which obviously has already been significant. At the onset, the banking industry had much higher levels of common equity capital, up from the 6 to 7% before the financial crisis to where we stand today, 12 to 14%. And yet there's now real concern whether these capital and liquidity buffers will be sufficient for the economic consequences of COVID-19. And in April, so a couple of months ago now, Bloomberg reported that for the first quarter, banks have set aside over $66 billion for bad loans. And that's just the start. And also, I think adding to the complexity here, as we look at the recovery from the pandemic, we know it won't happen in a V curve, but more like a W. And so we're all at different points depending on which regions, which countries, and which states we operate from. So just a few thoughts and insights from our clients globally. Short term, well, we are well through wave one, and some countries are, although they've started to emerge and look to return to work in short pieces, they may well need to revert to full lockdown again. And so what we've seen with this initial huge focus on work from home is it's really tested everybody's BCB capacity, resiliency, and security. In what we now think of as the medium term, firms are now coping with government stimulus programs, huge focus on preserving capital and rethinking in general how to operate. And we're seeing that banking with stable financial services brands becomes even more important during a crisis. So everybody's looking to maintain their customers' trust and provide even greater client experience is just one piece of that. And obviously, as organizations are looking to become leaner, automation's becoming even more important. And if we look out longer term, we think this isn't just a disruption, but this is going to present significant shifts in the operating model with a rapid acceleration of digitization. So there'll be new platform business models to create new revenue for the banks, more value for the customer. And that's why really focusing on assembling the right ecosystem becomes just so important. And lastly, but by no means least, data and AI will continue to spread. So if I were to summarize, we think there are three key themes that are emerging. As you all know, a renewed focus on operational and systems resiliency, new ways of working, because very few of our clients believe they'll ever return full-time to the office. And most importantly, where we think the most fundamental changes will occur is in restructuring operating models. So the need and the focus on preserving capital is driving radical cost reductions and greater efficiencies for the long term, as well as driving ways to variabilize cost. So not just remediating a process or a service, but externalizing it and then just paying for what's needed. And so this is where, the so-called hybrid cloud comes in. You own some of your technology, your data centers or your mainframes, and you also leverage private and public cloud infrastructure managed by others. So for the financial services firms, you get the security, the regulatory compliance and data protection that you all need on-prem, with additionally the speed to execution, innovation, and very importantly, scalability. And, lastly, while every bank's been looking, and I should say financial services firms been looking to transform and find ways to rebalance capital and operating expenditures, the COVID-19 crisis has clearly given us all a burning platform to move even faster. So I thought that might be a nice way just to set some context for our discussion, which Annie, I'll pass back to you now to facilitate for us. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So I wanted to get started by asking broadly how, with so many workers now doing their jobs from home, how you ensure productivity and how some of your workflow has changed given these unusual circumstances. And this is one I'm sure affects absolutely everyone in this chat, but JoAnn, maybe I'll start with you and what you see at Mastercard. So how do you ensure productivity of all your employees, and what are some of the ways that your workflow has changed with so many people working from home now?
So it's a great question, and I'll be interested in everyone's response to this question. I think, like almost every company, we had a business continuity plan. We certainly had tested it. We certainly were a company that many of our employees globally traveled an awful lot, and so we're used to working virtual for a selected amount of time. But bringing the entire company to a virtual environment was certainly something that was new and certainly presented infrastructure challenges. And I'm seeing nods from some of my fellow roundtable participants this morning. And that was, I think, the bigger challenge was just the volume of everybody practically. I mean, at one point, I think it was something like 96% of Mastercard was working virtual. We still had a few employees that we actually needed to be in the office for technological purposes to keep the lights running, but we need to go to a 96% of us were working virtually. And I have to admit that because we had so many people that had at different points in time worked virtually, it was pretty seamless for our managers to begin to think through how to work virtually within teams. So each team was actually quite good at their specific job. But what we had to get better at was a cross-team virtual collaboration, cross-team projects and planning. And certainly the area that I think most companies struggle with is doing the larger project innovation sessions where you'd get people together for a series of innovation sessions, you'd bring people in globally to build infrastructure or to build the next big project. or do the next phase of a project. And trying to do that work virtually, I think, was one of the more challenging things that we had to begin to work out across the company. As well as in the earliest days, though, most of our work was really focused on clients and customers, right? How are we going to support them? How are we going to make sure we were there for them? How are we going to be providing services for them? So as we move through this, I'm going to call it an evolution, because I think we've talked about it as a crisis. Now we're talking about it as some stabilization in some markets. But I think, to Sarah's point of it being a depending upon what market, what location that you're in, you're going to see different needs of your employees and collaboration. So early on, it was focus on your customers, make sure our clients have what they need, make sure our network is operating, make sure that all core functionality is working. That was the first step. But then from there, it's really how do we begin to innovate for the continued progress that we have promised and we need to fulfill for the balance of the year. And so we've really come together on smaller collaborations, I guess, breaking things down into manageable bites, so that when we get bigger groups together, there's a lot more pre-work that's been done so that we can discuss the dissension points, reach decisions. And so it's making people work smarter. It may require more smaller meetings before we get bigger group decisions together. And even then, we make sure that the senior decision makers are there so that decisions can get made for the rest of the team and that the teams can go on and do their work. So that's some of the ways that we've been changing things at Mastercard.
So if I'm understanding, beyond just the individual unit, the individual teams being able to do their job, the big question is how with everyone in the company pretty much working from home, 96%, how do you make sure that those collaborations are still able to happen with a lot of people, a lot of people? Dirk, did you have something you want to add to that?
Yes, I think that when we looked at this whole crisis, we looked at it in four phases in a way, and I think that one has helped us a lot in dealing with it. First, that same challenge that was mentioned just now is work from home in a massive form. So we had to transition 100,000 employees very quickly working from home. More than 1 million video calls we have sustained every day today. Contact center was a big challenge from enabling and serving our customers. So we made sure we can operate our contact centers fully from home. So I think that was one. And digital capacity as well was an interesting one because historically we had slight variations of logins, but what happened was that there were big days on which we had up to 8 times the volumes that than we usually see. So clearly those were the first challenges in the first phase, I would say. And then, as was mentioned, I think the governance schemes was really the second challenge that came our way with. I think first, the schemes had to be implemented. So we had to implement very quickly in a collaborative way the technology required. But then as well, the volumes, they are so large, like we had to do sometimes 100 times the usual volumes we have in a specific loan scheme. That had to as well then drive high levels of automation. So in a way, we had to implement the capabilities, but then as well drive a lot of automation for the new products that we had to launch. And interestingly, we had a third phase, which was around cash reduction or cash burn reduction. Because at the end of the day, we recognized after we had stabilized serving the customers in the best possible way as well, that we need to prepare for the future. We need to be sustainable, and cost efficiency is very important in that. And then we already started now the return to the new normal, whatever that means, in 2 dimensions. The first one is returning to the office doesn't mean that it works well from the office, because the technology in the office is not set up for 1 million video calls a day. Much easier when you do it from home directly as part of the cloud services we are using. And the second one is as well adjusting in a way the operating and business model to the new world, because we've learned now how to serve our customers in a more digital way. So we are now rethinking as well, what does that mean long-term for our business model and how do we sustain it? So in that sense, those were at least the phases that have helped us, and every country is at a different point in time in a different phase. But Spain, being one of the first ones, went already through those 4 phases, and we are now applying the same learnings for the Latin American presence we have.
Yeah, and I'd like to key off of one thing that you mentioned, which is that this huge shift will, even when it's safe to bring employees back to the office, necessarily generate some changes that will last. Are there changes that you see sticking around for the long haul? Maybe I'll go to Rich for this one. What kinds of changes do you think will stick around about how your team is doing business now, even when it is safe to bring some people back to the office?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. First, when we think about return to the office, when we think about the office used to be a place to work, right? And the way we're thinking about this now is the office becomes a place to meet. And we think that we've learned how to interact and collaborate and do everything from a virtual perspective. So we're going to have, going forward, if you look at our strategy, we're not going to bring everybody back. We're looking at a model that's 50% at max. And then when we bring people in, it's really going to be able to do that face-to-face collaboration. The thing that's difficult to do via Zoom or any of the other platforms, WebEx, and being able to collaborate within the office. So we're actually doing changes to our office environment now, shifting from just the cubicle model to how do we design places that are collaborative. Now, we still haven't figured out, right, social distancing and collaboration together. That's a challenge that we're going to have to work through. But we figure as the pandemic subsides, we're going to be able to collaborate more and figure out, with security precautions like testing and things like that coming into the office, temperature testing, we will still be able to collaborate. So we're thinking long term that the model shifts, and there's a fundamental difference.
It seems like so much of the past decade has been collaborative equals open office plan, which is of course not great in the current environment.
Hey, Annie, if I can just add on the point Rich made, because I think this is interesting. We just surveyed, our 300 plus IBMers, 300,000 plus IBMers, to ask them what they thought about returning to the office. And more than 76%, I think, don't quote me, but it was somewhere around there, to Rich's point, said they only saw the office now being for meetings. And the vast majority expected to be able to continue to work remotely from home because of the efficiencies that they've been able to gain by it. And obviously, as they've become much more in tune with the technologies that we use, not for communicating, but I think JoAnn's point about real innovation, that's where it's hard. But I think it was also very interesting, and I think this is something we all need to look at in terms of really breaking down those numbers by job function. And I think the real progress that we're going to make here as leaders is to really calibrate by job functions and determine which ones are going to need more, quote, office meeting use and which ones aren't, and really think ahead to the points that are being made around how automation can also substitute that need as well. And what we're hearing from our clients, it's that job function discussion that's actually proving to be the one where people are really focused on, because they realize they're creating models for the future now.
Absolutely. And are there any, I think that one issue that might be something that we need to deal with going forward, if you do have more employees who elect to work from home and if the office is only for collaboration, is how do you manage cybersecurity going forward if much of your workforce is at home? So that's something that's that every company has had to adjust to very rapidly in this environment, but I'm curious to hear from some of you all about managing those risks. Tree, do you want to tell us how you guys are thinking about managing cybersecurity threats when everyone is on their own home office setup, when you might be in an environment very soon where only a portion of employees are back in the office?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, before I jump into cybersecurity, one comment I wanted to extend Sarah's conversation to was humans are essentially social. Like what we've seen is where places are opening up, people come back together really quickly, no matter what the guidelines are. So we have to be extremely careful about how that happens. Also, organizations are formed based on relationships and emotional connections. And Zoom video calls or Teams video calls are not necessarily the best medium to form those connections and relationships. And then the connection of an employee to a company is also an emotional relationship. And in this way of remote working, we may actually go into a new zone of talent war that we have not seen ever before, because loyalties to companies and such may be a completely new paradigm. So engaging our customers, engaging our employees from a leadership perspective in this world will mean new kinds of leadership that we've not seen before. So that's a comment that I just wanted to add there.
That's a good point for recruiting too, I'm sure. How do you recruit in an environment where you have people working so remotely?
Yeah, so, but I mean, on the question of cybersecurity, it's extremely critical. We've just expanded the perimeter of our companies now into people's homes. And granted, in developed countries like maybe the US and UK and so on, there is enough in terms of protections you can provide. But when you're talking about a customer support employee in a remote location somewhere in India or Philippines, where the infrastructure may not be the best, how do you actually ensure that the customer information that they're working with is actually managed properly and so on? So I would say it's something I guess we all have been preparing for many quarters and years for. So it's not a new problem per se, because work has been going remote for many years now. So we've been preparing for it, but this presents some new step function challenges that you need to look at and prepare for in the cybersecurity technologies and paradigms that you invest in.
Yeah. James, anything to add there? How do you guys manage the potential threats of cybersecurity when so much of the workforce is home? James, is your
absolutely.
audio on?
I think we've always had a very holistic sort of multi-layer approach to security. When we think about are we sorry, network issues on my end. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. There's a slight delay on video. But
I think I would echo a lot of the points he made. We've always also, obviously DTCC security is paramount, right, in terms of the core business. So we've always had So we've always had a multi-layer approach to our security, right? Obviously protecting our core systems that sit within the data centers. I think the exact point we have so many of our users, it's that endpoint security that obviously is now sort of, where I think we and the industry are very focused. We do have, again, a lot of our call center people and remote users using things like VDI. So that helps to, again, I think, bolster that security because, again, you get the advantages, of course, of being within the, the perimeter walls of our, definitely a lot of our focus has been on that.
Yeah. Dirk, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it's interesting when we look at it. I think there's a fundamental shift happening. In the past, we secured the devices, we secured our private networks, and we secured the data centers. But what we now see is that in reality, we need to secure the devices extremely well, and we secure the data center. But the private networks as such are pretty much not necessary in that sense anymore. So the real boundary around the enterprise becomes the data center and the device. Because if you look, the old parameter was always our network, but the old parameter as such is disappearing. So the real backbone of communication is becoming now public networks. And what we've seen, to be honest, the resilience of the public networks have been extremely strong, while the private networks were much more challenged. Like, as I said, we have 1.3 million, up to 1.3 million video calls a day. It would never work in my private networks. It only works because it goes via the public networks, the internet infrastructure, and the cloud infrastructure. So I feel there's a fundamental shift towards the endpoint being, in a way, your parameter, and your data center being the parameter. And that means I'm looking at the moment that, do I need even private networks? Should I not just take every single office building and connect it to the internet? and the way of working from home is the one working here. It's interesting. I did a test, and the network connection at my home is much better than the one I have in the office today. Very clearly, we need to make sure that we don't take a step back by returning to the office, but that we are really improving that. So I think there's a fundamental shift around how we think about security happening around the endpoint.
That's a great point. JoAnn, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just on that point about device, we've always had a really strong phishing program because it's also about your people, right?
Right.
And we've seen so many more attempts to get in, right? Because the bad actors are also realizing that we're more vulnerable given that we've all moved virtual. And so we've really upped our phishing campaigns with our employees, trying to help with that vulnerability, right, as well, because let's face it, that is the real endpoint of where things get in. And so we've done a whole lot more on our virtual phishing and education with our employees in this virtual world, trying to make sure that that very vulnerable endpoint isn't the place where things are getting in. And so just, I'm just building on everything that Dirk said and Tree said, because I agree with all the points made and agree about the virtual private network to the public and the need to continuously reevaluate, right, how we're doing this. But because you're going to have so many more vulnerable endpoints now, it also means your people now really need to be trained and it really needs to be reinforced that they are now really, truly, it's no longer that they're in the office and they would do this just as a compliance exercise, but you need them to really be vigilant for folks who are trying to get in. So that's all I wanted to add.
Absolutely, especially I'm sure in the context where you might be distracted at home by your family or other things going on around you. You might not have an ideal setup. Seems like it's important to be extra vigilant about phishing. Do you want to say something before you give a point on cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that a couple of years ago, we started investing in a philosophy called Zero Trust Architecture. And that, I would say, with the movement of the perimeter into homes and coffee shops and things of that nature, it has paid off in a great way. It's a fundamental rethinking of how you think of security. And I'm sure many of you are also either implementing it or probably are even ahead and implemented it already. But ZTA is definitely a trend to watch.
Chintan, I wanted to call on you next. What would you like to add on cybersecurity?
The couple of points I think Sri added, and then I think what we started with, the perimeterless defense strategy, which is the zero trust architecture, is actually, I think, the essential requirement, whether this crisis would have happened or not. We were moving workloads onto cloud for elasticity and for speed. That was just the reality where we were going with it. The one other thing which I would call out, which I think we sort of all alluded to, is it is an arms race. So there is definitely going to be events as sort of penetration events and the surface expands. One thing that we are very conscious about and working very actively is like creating a network where you can understand threat intelligence on an ongoing basis. So essentially, not everybody's going to get attacked at the same time. Not everybody's going to have the ability to detect at the same time. So how can you actually learn from all these peers, industry peers, as well as like agencies, national and international agencies? I think that's critical because we don't know the surface how it is going to get exploited. So that's actually going to be super critical.
Absolutely. Dirk, you want to get off of that too?
And I think there's one point I wanted to add is about third parties. What we are seeing as well is when we look at it, in this crisis, we managed our environment, we had a good control, we had the right tools. But then when you look at it, we rely today on a vast amount of third parties, and some of them don't have the same maturity. So when we look at data leakage, when we look at cybersecurity, when we look at business interruption, I think this whole supply chain, which we are relying on much more today, is much more complicated because even for a while it was hard to buy IT equipment. Laptops were like gold nuggets in the market. It was hard to get them. So if you think about it, the whole ecosystem of supply chain and ensuring that end-to-end all of the cybersecurity, business continuity, and everything else is guaranteed is an important factor which we would put even more focus on in the future. So we already looked at it, as we all did, I'm sure, but I feel it's even a further focus required because this one has been in this crisis one of the more challenging environments.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, many of you may know we have a specialized regulatory consulting arm, Promontory. So they work directly with the regulators to make sure that we at IBM are really informed, and led in the UK, but then quickly followed in Europe. And this was pre-COVID-19. So to Dirk's point, you can only imagine what COVID-19 is doing to this huge regulatory focus on what's called operational resilience. And the initial finding for the regulators is that, frankly, very few firms really do know what their true end-to-end third-party dependency is. They may know it to a certain point along the value chain, but they don't know it all the way through. And then, Dirk, to your point, to really understand not just who the players are, but what their controls are like, and the sophistication and effectiveness is a huge effort. So, our sense is that this is going to be one of the next sort of wake-up calls for the regulators with the industry, and it's going to require an enormous amount of work and focus, but for hopefully a very good outcome.
Chintan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, the only point I was going to make was, I think that the second degree, third degree, fourth degree dependency as you go, I think that complexity is bound to increase. And there is a natural reaction to some of these where you can go like, perimeterless defense is what we want to be, but let's build a perimeter. So then you start having conversations around, can we like shrink back around what we do, what possibilities, what offerings you give customers, but as an implication of that. So I think that balance is super critical. I think in the short term, we'll see a little bit of a protectionist reaction around, oh, you can't do certain things, which would have been a little bit further out in terms of pushing the boundary, especially in the fintech, financials industry more than many other industries. So it's going to be interesting. I definitely think that the point you're making, that that's a problem we have to solve if we have to evolve, is really important.
Another thing that seems to be happening in this increasingly crazy time is people's roles are changing and evolving, maybe in permanent ways too. So Rich, I wonder if you have any thoughts on how your role maybe has been affected by this crisis, and how you think it might be going forward, how you see your future different in a leadership as a result of COVID-19.
Sure, Annie, and I have a unique title in this group. I'm a Chief Digital and Information Officer, right? So, one of the things that I would just say is, when COVID hit, we've seen three reactions from companies. One is retreat to run, okay? And that's where, how do you optimize your costs? How do you figure out, right? How do you just maintain and run your business? The second is strive to maintain, right? Companies are holding on to their strategic plans that they had prior to COVID, and then figuring out how do you, deliver on those plans post-COVID. And then the third group of companies, and Aflac's kind of in that model, is we're taking the opportunity to reinvent and looking at everything that we do and say, how do we reinvent ourselves in a post-COVID world? And, COVID is really the new disruptor. We talked about a little bit about how disrupting is happening in the workplace, how it's happening in security. But in the past, the disruptors were the Amazons of the world, the Ubers of the world, the Netflix. But we now have a natural disruptor that's coming in and saying, hey, you have to reinvent. You have to reinvent how you deal with your customers. You have to reinvent how your employees act. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're doubling down on digital, okay? And what that means is that we're looking at our entire business model. How, I'm coming from the insurance side, so we typically sell in the workplace, and we sell insurance products into the workplace. So now there's no workplace, and we have to convert our products to be bought instead of sold. We have to use digital mediums. We have to enable our independent agents to act in a different model. And so if you look at the entire value chain of our business, from sales all the way through to operations, we've actually just presented to our Global Operations and Technology Committee a series of investments where we're accelerating all of our digital roadmap to be able to push things in this year. And so, my role, you said, how does your role change? it goes from kind of, technology and digital now becomes how you run your business. And, us as technologists now have the ability to really drive business strategy. And I'll just say that COVID, for all of us that have done it right, and I'm confident that everybody that in this call has helped being able to shift our company to a virtual model, we've earned the trust and respect of our business, right? And they've never seen technology deliver like we have. And so that allows us to take a different position within our company to be able to set strategy and really to help redefine kind of your company direction. So I would just summarize that the role has shifted into more, initially it was tactical, how do you survive this? And now it's really, how do you reinvent coming out of that? And how do you create a whole new agenda that helps respond to the natural disruption caused by COVID?
Chintan, I see your hand raised. Did you want to build on how you think that your role might be different?
Yeah, sorry, I should have unclicked that, but I'll go ahead and comment nonetheless. So I think I agree with Rich. The pressure around operational efficiency, the pressure around the fact that you cannot service your customers in what you traditionally thought or conventionally thought you can do, and the fact that your people are not able to work how they normally thought they would do, forces a fairly new way of operating across the board with your teams, what you offer, how you offer. For me personally, because I have digital product and engineering as well as innovation, quote unquote, a lot of the focus area on innovation has shifted towards operational efficiency and it changed quite early on in the year around, instead of doing all these adjacent possibilities on product offerings, distributed ledger offerings or blockchain offerings, we started like shifting a little bit around. Can we pick what we already have and like do an inward-looking set of innovative actions? And I think that is going to be fairly critical for a certain amount of time. And I think then it has to come back. I think the new normal will look different, but it has to be some combination of my mental model is survive, comply, grow. So survive is you want to be able to absorb the shock as they come. I think Sri's comment around like the volumes are just shifting. Like the day we had the PPP, the response or the stimulus checks, we saw 18 times higher volume in that one day than we have ever seen, typically. And to be able to handle that is important. You need to have the resiliency to handle that. You still have to be compliant with regulation and the fact that you have to do right by the customers and the regulators. And at the end of the day, you have to come out of this with some strategy which allows us to do more. So I think it's that is the shift in the role. I think, and I completely agree with. I think everybody's going to say the same thing. Is like technology has become more of a central player in this equation, and it's going to be fun.
Sri, what are your thoughts on that, and how your role might be different moving forward?
Yeah, so I wanted to introduce a bit of a different area that I'm seeing our roles change in. I think many of us have become the chief therapists for our organizations at this point in time. And I have to say that, the switch to going virtual and remote happened almost instantaneously. It was one day where it was announced and everybody went home, right? And then in the first week, everybody created communities on Slack and various other chat channels, started sharing. Week one was all about share how my workspace looks. Week two was about actually look like maybe sharing the pictures of their pets. Week three was sharing the pictures of the food they were cooking and eating, or maybe the break they were taking and so on. But soon enough, mental health as a topic started to surge in a fairly significant way. The isolation and loneliness all started to kick in. And I'm sure all of you are seeing some form of that. And then, of course, like particularly in the United States, the incidents of the last few weeks have added further to what was already a COVID-19 new normal in mental health. So I would say the importance of connection, the importance of conversation, the importance of compassion, the importance of inclusion have all just accelerated in ways. And I am beginning to see leaders who are natural with that thrive very well, and the leaders who are not natural with that struggle a bit, but still try to learn and so on. So I'd invite others to comment on what's not a technical topic, but I mean, people are such a critical part, and this is a thing we have observed.
That's such a good point, that it's removed some of the taboos of emotional or psychological topics you might not normally broach with your coworkers. Everyone's different situations, I think, have brought that more forward. Anything, would anyone else like to build on that? Oh yeah, I see a couple of hands raised here. JoAnn, what would you like to add?
So I think when I look at the topic, I think it's a very important one. This mental health topic has been very important. We try to support with psychologists and everything else, but I feel that's what we try to drive is the team itself needs to show strength. Co-workers calling each other, making sure people stay in touch. Nobody is left behind, I would call it. And what we've done some analysis on the volumes and calls and everything, and we identified a number of people that probably no email, no call, they were like, they disappeared off the planet. So I made sure if people disappear, I want people to be called. I want to find out. I want to make sure we take care of them. So I think this taking care of each other in this isolation is key, because they are the ones that almost drive in it. We've seen that 15% of our people are like hyperactive, I would call it. 15% are a bit more passive, and the rest is dealing very well with it. So I feel really everybody deals with this crisis, with the pressure differently. And as organizations, we need to learn with that, because the crisis is not over. I think that there might be second waves, there might be further topics. So we need to continuously make sure our teams take care of each other. And we still have a bit of an alarm system, I would call it, to identify whenever somebody gets totally disconnected, so that we call them so that they are fine. Another quick point on Rich's comment, which I think was very good. I think it's an opportunity for transformation, because in the past, I would say there was always a message transform, it was always a bit like the digital teams or the technology teams being told, we need to become more digital. But now today, it's clear for the business at whole that we need to change. I think there's a huge opportunity with this total alignment between business and technology that we need to transform in this new world. And that alignment can lead to accelerated paths. I think Rich mentioned that they are accelerating all of the digital pieces. We as well looking at prioritizing in a way our portfolio to say, what really matters at this time. So what matters, and then we accelerate what matters. And there are many things where we say, perhaps this is not as important in the future today. So I feel it's a real opportunity between the business and ourselves to really now hit this transformation deeper than before. Before it was sometimes a bit superficial. With the crisis, the business absolutely gets it. They totally understand it has to change. And that alignment, based as well on the trust and the reputation of IT having done a great job during the crisis, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to deeply transform how our business operates.
Yeah. JoAnn, did you want to weigh in on any ways that you think that your role might be different, or this topic of mental health and shepherding some of these kind of conversations with your team?
So I'm going to try to tie in a couple of different threads that I wanted to jump in on. First of all, I'm a chief data officer, which is slightly different. And my role certainly is similar in that I think we are now much more keyed into the strategic focus as everything moves digital. And so in partnering with all of my technology colleagues, trying to enable the quicker, faster movement and availability of our information assets to make them available for innovation. While we've been on a road, the need for that is even increased with COVID. And it goes to the comments that I think Sri and Chintan and Rich, Dirk, all of you have touched on, that evolutionary opportunity for innovation. And certainly, as we got closer to our customers and understood what they needed, right? They needed solutions that built on some of our data assets or their data assets. And so we needed to come up with cobbling together different, different platforms that we had, but put them together in different ways to come up with solutions, whether it was for, and again, our clients fall in the buckets that were outlined before. Some are just trying to stay in business, right, through a severe crisis, economic crisis. You look at some of our airline partners, right, where their businesses have essentially shut down, and hotels, to other companies who are able to kind of stay static, to many of the organizations like the ones I guess that are participating. This can be a transformational moment as you try to look ahead and say, how are we going to reposition and really innovate in this moment to provide the new services that are needed? But then I do think there's a knock-on effect to our employees. So we had maybe 1 week of the sharing of puppies and workspaces and getting used to spouses being in the background, I think, before we were so hard hit with the demand from our customers that what we're facing is also the burnout effect of the 24/7 workday. And we quickly jumped into a lot of, from the very top level of our company, having every other week a global town hall, all hands employee calls, to then doing it by business line, to then doing team calls. So I had virtual office hours every single week with my global team to try to give people the ability just to talk about what it's like to work with your spouse home and your kids, schooling, and those pressures. We did virtual happy hours on Zoom where we could, so that people could decompress. And yes, then the additional pressures of all of the racial demonstrations added an additional need for other conversations that are still going to change us, I think, as we move forward. But I think we also have to recognize that this is an evolution and we're not going to solve everything all at once, but we also need to bring our employees along in that conversation. And so we have been constantly communicating what's happening in different offices. When might we reopen? What are we thinking about to keep people safe, right? How are we going to continue? Because partly we know that most of us, some of us, are always going to be virtual now. So what does that do to culture? I think Shri talked about that. How do you keep a company culture in a virtual world? How do you recruit in a virtual world, right? How do you look at the next generation of workers who are going to join us in a virtual world and then come potentially to an office for those meetups that Rich talked about, right? That those how do you make those moments even more special? But then how do you make the work really meaningful? And then right now we have a big campaign trying to get people to take vacation and time off because they're not doing that, right? Yeah. So I think that that this means that we are asking so much more of people. Back to, seasoned managers, piece of cake. New managers, this is like a workload. We used to, score people on can they manage a virtual team. Well, guess what? Everybody's got a virtual team now, right? So we're upping now the resources, but we're already in New York on our 13th week of this, right? This is a quarter of the year has elapsed since we've gone virtual. This is really a huge transformation moment. And I think either you step into it with a positive attitude of, this is difficult. Yes, this is a lot of change. And so this is an opportunity for creativity. Tell us your ideas. Let's do it together. And allow people the opportunity to say, this is also super hard and we're here to listen and we need your dialogue with us. Because if you don't acknowledge it's difficult and new and clunky and that the dog is barking and that your kids are underfoot and all the other things, then there's more laundry to do and the dishwasher's always running and all the other things, right? Then you're going to lose people in that process. But I think there's ups and downs for the W effect. It's also personal to our employees. And I think that takes incredible leadership. So I'm glad you brought that up, Shri. I think that's absolutely part of our new roles. But the innovation that we get to lead as technologists and for myself as a data expert is really, really exciting because we're on the verge of changing things that and it's an acceleration of plans that we probably had roadmaps for, but it's going to be faster. And so that's going to be part of the challenge too. And how do you get your employees to be excited by that, not overwhelmed, is one thing.
And the point that you make on vacation even plays into this mental health issue too. People have gone maybe the entire year so far without taking a break, and you have all these additional pressures. I want to call on Sarah and then James if you guys have anything to add.
I'll just make two quick points, and they're really building off everything you've said. I love this reality that given the trust and leadership that the technologies leaders have shown, you've earned the trust now to lead your organizations. And I think around that, I've got two thoughts. One is we have this paradox where although everybody's now working remotely, the opportunity, as JoAnn was saying, for greater participation is the highest it's ever been. And so as we think about setting our innovation agendas, resetting our strategies, etc., there's a huge opportunity here to invite everybody to participate in that. And that's something that we've been doing a lot at IBM. We love doing jams, as you know. We've done a lot of Slack channels with Arvind and anybody who's, everybody, because it gives our colleagues a real chance to feel like they're contributing, and there's no reason why they can't. Obviously, when you do that, you also acquire accountability to say what you're going to do with the contributions, and that's on all of us too. So this notion of innovation, but innovation that actually can embrace the whole company because everybody can have a say in it and provide their opinions, I think is very powerful. The other thought, we've been talking a lot in our company around not just the skills, but the capabilities you need to lead for the future. The idea being skills are very individual things, and what we really need are to have new capabilities that work at scale. And so with that, and this sort of builds on some of the discussions here about how eager people are to participate and get involved in things, we've been able to hold really, really powerful discussion/training sessions. We've brought a lot of outside thinkers in. It's very easy at the moment just to set these WebExes up and, okay, we use the Cisco stuff, and invite a lot of third parties in to talk to us. And it's, again, very powerful. And it's showing our employees that we are investing in them. So it's another way also of showing the right leadership, is taking the time, because people do have more availability, notwithstanding the stresses they're under, to really invest in them and do it not just within our own walls, but do it in terms of, inviting people in. And frankly, our experience is people, very eager to participate in these types of sessions because we all want to learn from each other at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. James, I saw your hand was raised earlier. Did you want to add to any of that as far as your role changing or any of these points that have been made around how to adapt your team to this new reality? I can't hear, so maybe the best way is to put any additional thoughts in the chat there. I can't believe the time is going really quickly. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left. Dirk, go ahead if you had anything to add on that.
Yes, I think it was mentioned by somebody about the recruitment and the job market, and I think that's an important point, because in a way you have a combination. Some people are losing their jobs, other people are clinging to their job because they feel like, wow, who knows what's out there. And I think there is clearly a notion, how do we recruit and find the talent? I think Three mentioned that there might be even a new talent war that is different. At the moment, we are hiring this year 3,000 people in IT. We've continued during the crisis, but we have people that have never seen the office at the moment working for us. I'm not sure, That goes back to your commentary where you said, how do you generate the belonging, the culture, the alignment with people that have never seen their colleagues beyond a video conference? So I still believe there's something which I don't think we have the solution yet. We have the ambition, we are driving, we are hiring good talent, but how do you integrate them into the culture? Because I said as well, I'm now 2 years in my current role, so I had the trust of my teams. It was easy to do that one. It's easy with teams that you know for long and you have a good trust with. But if you're a new manager, if you're just hired, how do you get into it? How do you get into this whole ecosystem of a company? I don't think that we have these simple answers to that, but clearly there are challenges around this job market, integration of people. The office plays a role, I think, as a meeting place, but as well a bit as a natural place and the center of that culture that still needs to be maintained. So in that sense, I feel the office still has to play an important role, but home working needs to be a natural part of how we operate, but it's not binary. It's not all to the office, all from home. I think there is a balance. Everybody personally needs to find and structure to have the best efficiency and well-being. And I think for a well-being perspective, it's good news for all of our people, no? Because now we find we are more flexible on finding the right balance for them, no?
Yeah, Shri, did you want to build on that?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One is particularly living in the Bay Area, the number of people who comment often that they are pleased with not having a 2-hour commute every single day and can therefore now for the first time maybe put that time into a 30-minute workout they've been planning for 2 decades. It's big. It's huge. One comment that, Dirk, you triggered for me is we've actually increased our investment in VR. And VR as a method of allowing new people coming into the company to basically do virtual walkthroughs of campuses and things of that nature, so that when one day when they come into the campus, it actually feels familiar to them versus like them coming in blind and feeling like it's day one all over again when they've been at the company maybe for 180 days.
Wow. So I'm curious how that works. Do you give them like a virtual reality tour of what the campus will look like?
Yeah. So we've every year we've actually run something called an expo. It started off as a tech expo where engineers would come and highlight their innovations for a couple of days, and people would walk through the auditorium and see what people have been up to. This year we are turning that into something called the Pavilion. And the Pavilion is going to be fully virtual. You'll need a virtual headset, and you'll get a URL that you can go to, and you can essentially navigate the whole thing. And we are extending that from the expo to now just being an onboarding tool, where like you'll get a URL to click, and your virtual reality headset will allow you to walk through the campus and go like, hey, here's where the lobby is, and here's where the command center is, and here's where the cyber defense center is, here's where the bar is, here's where the foosball table is, and so on. So just, a way, I think Dirk made the comment of how the office is a cultural connector. It's a hub. It's an important thing. It never goes away. I think it'll always be there, even though its utility may reduce compared to what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. And I think tying back what you said about employees having a couple minutes to work out in the morning too is kind of an interesting point as far as we were saying about keeping a workforce engaged and more alert. If you're able to get that in the morning, it actually might help your productivity. So unfortunately, we've run to the end of our program here. We run out of time, but I think that this has been a really informative and interesting discussion. And we've touched on a lot of different topics, from something as in the weeds as cybersecurity to something as big picture as how you keep a workforce engaged and attentive and connected in a crisis time like now. So it's been super, super interesting to hear from all of you on this. I want to say a big thanks again to IBM and to Sarah for sponsoring this program and for bringing us all here together today. And I completely agree with you, Sarah, that I don't miss the New York subway system at all during this time. So that's been one plus, I think, that we can all agree on. So yeah, with that, I think we've come to the end of our program, and I'd like to say thanks to all of you for participating today.
Thank you. Thanks
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.